Now up we have our MILR research assistants who will be kind of going from the 20,000-foot level that Kevin was at, really kind of drilling down into some of the current issues and challenges that HR leaders are facing today, specifically around the context of remote and hybrid work. Let me quickly introduce our three presenters. First up, we have Holly Harmon, who is a second-year graduate student here in our MILR program. She's a passionate member of the ILR community, as obviously one of our CAHRS research assistants, but also the ILR Graduate Student Association president, and also a teaching assistant for the Workplace Disability and Inclusion course. This summer, she interned with PepsiCo, and prior to coming to Cornell, she had received an undergraduate degree at Western Michigan University in 2020, majoring in human resources and business analytics, as well as did research there as well. Next up, we have Dan Miller, also one student in the MILR program. He attended Northeastern University in Boston, Massachusetts as a business major and graduated in 2011. After graduation, he worked for 10 years in the tech industry, starting with a small startup, followed by IBM as a business analyst, and then as an internal consultant at Altisource, a financial technology company. This summer, he had the pleasure of supporting the D&I team at Train Technologies and is now entering his fourth and final semester as a MILR. He's still exploring post-graduation options, but is excited to get back to work. See, school's not always that easy. Rashi Vora is a second-year MILR candidate set to graduate in December. Prior to joining ILR, she earned a bachelor's in business administration from MIMS University and a master's in commerce in Mumbai, India. She started her career in M&A and valuations advisory with Deloitte, and then shifted gears to transition into organizational consulting, focusing on leadership and organization development. This summer, she interned with Cummings in their Center of Excellence and will join their functional HR excellence team post-graduation. Thanks to the three of you for joining us and for all of your work this semester, and we're looking forward to hearing your insights. So I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Brad, for that introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. We're so excited to share our findings from the fall 2022 benchmarking study. We wanted to really understand talent strategies in an ever-changing work environment. As Dan mentioned, I had the pleasure of working with Dan Miller and Holly Harmon. All three of us are MILR students at Cornell University in our final year. So the agenda for today is first, we're going to start to just understand the focus of our study, and then dive into returning to work and the implications of modality on work. Then we're going to understand impact on talent strategy and the changes that we've observed in leadership capabilities. And we wanted to end with some big picture implications and considerations for the future. We'll also have some time for Q&A towards the end. So something we were really curious to understand is that with the pandemic, there's been a lot of change in employee expectations, the way work means to them and what value it adds to their lives. But at the same time, there have been stagnant or more increasing operational pressures on business strategy. So leadership has been playing a balancing act in this situation. And we really wanted to understand how companies are rethinking their talent strategy to remain competitive as they navigate a post-pandemic work environment. Some of the topics of focus for our study are work modalities, pain points faced, leadership capabilities, and some overall themes. So for the study, we had the privilege to partner with 16 partner companies. We conducted 15 interviews and also had a quantitative survey to support it. We got an opportunity to speak to 35 plus leaders in different talent strategy spaces, and we're so grateful for learning more about how they're navigating this change. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Holly, who's going to help us understand returning to work and the implications of modality.
Thank you so much. So in this section, we're going to focus on modalities across organizations, hybrid as the newest normals, as well as additional themes that we have gained from the data as well as the interviews. So modalities across organizations, we saw that 100% of surveyed companies are keeping some type of new work modality. So they're rethinking what flexibility means to different groups, and they're redefining teamwork, productivity, and connection. As you can see from this chart, only 3 out of 16 organizations kept the same work modalities as they had in the pandemic. So we are seeing a return to more in-person modalities compared to what we were doing during the pandemic, which was in many ways mostly virtual. So we've also seen that hybrid is the newest normal. We talked about change in the previous presentation. Change is continuing to happen. So as of right now, hybrid is here. Post-pandemic work modalities are being dominated by hybrid work. No 2 organizations have the same hybrid experience. One organization may allow for considerable flexibility for their employees, and another organization may have more considerable policy in place and may have a different definition for what hybrid is for them. Employees understand this difference and they're communicating their current wants and needs in regards to that hybrid experience that will support their work and life. And then least impacted were the manufacturing, plant, and field employees, who a large component of their job is in person. This pie chart just shows that out of all the organizations that we connected with in this study, the majority said that hybrid was dominating their different job groups across their organization. So as we were speaking with the different organizations that were navigating new modalities, we saw 3 different types. Type 1 offered hybrid work modalities as a differentiating option for its talent before the COVID pandemic, but now they have lost that advantage. Their critical consideration is to continue to further develop unique employee experiences moving forward. The second type of organization implemented new work modalities and is now focused on aligning its employee value proposition with its business strategy. And their consideration is to measure the impact of these changes to their talent strategy overall. And then the third type of organization struggled to effectively align its talent strategy with the conflicting interests of its management and employees. We believe that they need to utilize data to make a choice on modality and enact it with a clear communication strategy. So many organizations currently are dealing with, should we be hybrid? Should we be in person? What is best for us? And we understand that some organizations will be more successful with meeting their business goals if they do have most of their workforce in person or different groups in person. We have found that successful return to the office strategy is focused on intentionality, connection, and how that relates to the core mission of the organization. We also have found that in-office events may bring people back for a day, but these strategies are not successful long-term. And then there is also a major disconnect between what leaders and employees believe is the needed modality for the success of the company, and that's creating a major pain point. And then in addition, we found that a lack of data regarding productivity and performance is leading to inaction. So our hybrid work elements of success, we found that there are 3 successful elements that different organizations have been utilizing in different ways to support these changes in work experiences. So number 1, reliable and consistent technology. Obviously, the many organizations that are on the call are using technology in different ways, but finding the right type of technological support platforms as well as tools are really important to be successful in this changing environment. Next are in-person orientation for new employees. Some organizations are doing the first week is like a get together at a corporate location where they connect with employees, they connect employees to the goal of the organization. And other organizations are saying for the first couple of months to year, the employee should be in person to really gain an understanding of culture, the mission, and connect with different employees in the organization. And finally, we found that really successful organizations who've been navigating these changes have consistent communication across all levels. Where they had pain points was if they were making it so that like middle managers were feeling a pressure to communicate these changes to their employees, whereas really successful organizations had clear plans on how they were going to break the communication of different modalities and changes to their employees. So next, Rashi is going to talk about the impact on talent strategy.
Thanks, Holly. So now that we've got like a pulse check on seeing how organizations are looking forward with their work modalities, let's see how that has implications on talent strategy. So we're going to talk about the top pain points across different levels of employees, the implications on the talent strategy, and we specifically wanted to zoom in on the implications for manufacturing and plant groups. From a survey, we recognize different pain points across different levels of employees. The first and major pain point for senior leaders feel in manufacturing, and as you can see, consistent across all levels, has been talent acquisition. With senior leaders, we see their role is much more demanding, and there's a lot of burnout in that level, and it's been difficult to attract talent for that reason. So field in manufacturing, as Holly mentioned earlier, it's also the lack of flexibility, and the because of the lack of flexibility, it's been difficult to get talent because talent for that reason. And with retention and engagement, these are other two areas where there's been a lot of pain points across levels. Retention is something that, as you might expect from the Great Resignation, it's been difficult to retain talent because of the amount of opportunities available. Engagement is an area where we've seen a lot of change, which we'll dive deeper into, essentially because companies are still learning how to engage employees and permeate their culture from a distance. And lastly, rewards and pay has been an issue for manufacturing and plant groups because of the competitive pressures provided by tech companies. So really diving into the implications on talent strategy, for engagement, that's been an area of the most change in talent strategy. That's reflected in the chart here as well, where you can see that there's been a lot of experimentation and a steep learning curve because companies are still trying to understand how to permeate their culture from a distance. Compensation is another area where there's been a lot of change, essentially because it's being used as a tool to retain high potential employees. It's also used to attract talent for roles which are completely in person and might not provide that flexibility. And lastly, something which we found very interesting is implications on performance management. While there's no change in the way people assess performance, there has been training implications for managers to evaluate outcome versus attendance. Something where we see that there will be a lot of change ahead is learning how to measure outcomes for knowledge workers where it might not be a very traditional way to do so. And lastly, we really wanted to zoom in on the manufacturing and plant groups because companies are recognizing the shifting gears in manufacturing. Some of the challenges that they're facing is talent acquisition and retention, as I mentioned earlier, but also the inequity in benefiting from the EVP of flexibility. If the organization really prides itself on the flexibility it provides to its employees, and it doesn't translate to this particular group, it causes inequity in the experience that different employees have in your organization. So for this, these are some of the tried and tested remedies that have worked for companies. Really rethinking the EVP and how it means for this group. The one-size-fits-all approach might not work very well anymore, and thinking about how you can provide stronger benefits, more opportunities for career growth and transitions to really move from non-exempt to exempt roles and give them the trajectory that they require is helpful. Additionally, companies are really using a lot of different models of hybrid work for this group, like 4-day work week, split shifts, etc. And we see that this is also an area of experimentation where there will be some change in the next few years. And with that, I hand it over to Dan to take us through the changes in leadership capabilities.
Thanks, Rashi. Perfect. So we've observed new approaches to building leadership capabilities which suit emerging work arrangements, specifically concerning adaptability, new leadership expectations, and all levels of leadership serving as culture ambassadors for new and old employees. Across the board, adaptability emerged as the most impactful leadership capability, followed closely by a diversity mindset and empathy. A key differentiator we've seen in great leaders is the ability to view challenges as opportunities to improve and learn. They need to challenge their assumptions around success, and the most effective leaders in adapting to change are those who view failures as opportunities to learn from mistakes and use that learning to drive improvements the next time around. Adaptability is a critical capability for any employee, but we saw that it was particularly important for those that are leading others and an organization through ever-changing contexts. Naturally, leadership expectations have changed as well. Novel leadership development approaches for senior and regional leaders focus on gaining critical mass of adaptable leaders with a diversity mindset and an empathetic approach. However, these leaders face unprecedented time management requirements, overwhelming collaboration pressures, and not only employee burnout, but their own burnout challenges as well. Although some changes have occurred at the manufacturing level, they were understandably least impacted by new work modalities. However, we did hear about some emerging developments focused on improving equity. With the changing models and meaning of socialization at work, leaders play an even greater role in being proponents of culture and how work is done. Many successful organizations trained middle managers and frontline managers as culture ambassadors and were quick to develop culture permeation training for new employees. In addition, we found that these organizations provided simple yet effective trainings focused on things like how to work remotely or how to lead remotely. And ultimately, we found that productivity and business results were not impacted by work modality. However, we did see that productivity paranoia was present, which is the disconnect between how much people say they're working and how much leaders think they're working. The organizations that communicated the best flex work outcomes focused on enabling essential collaboration while removing productivity paranoia. We found that organizations enable essential collaboration, which is the most important type of collaboration, in hybrid and remote work settings by implementing work modality policies that encourage employees to develop and mobilize a broad network of connections for innovation and the ability to scale their work regardless of physical location. They also create energy and engagement in their networks so opportunities and talent flow freely. We also find renewal through personal connections that increase physical and mental well-being. As we look towards the future, we analyzed both survey and interview data and developed some insights to help guide a path forward into the future of work. We found that the top post-pandemic talent strategies were developed with intentionality in the design and execution. By aligning both HR strategy to firm competitive advantage, as well as firm strategy, we found that many organizations that did that were superior at responding to changing conditions on the ground and to cultural differences across the globe. One large multinational firm we interviewed continued their hybrid/remote working modalities because they saw better business results and employee engagement over the pandemic. For them, it wasn't about individual flexibility so much as they wanted to make their teams as effective as possible. And they found that work modality, being team specific, was the most impactful.
From our conversations, we also learned a lot about the change in the employee-employer relationship. There's been a reprioritization of work, and the meaning that work provides and the fulfillment that it provides to you has been changing. There are also a lot of alternate revenue streams and gig works which might provide flexibility to different tiers of employees. On the plus side, the pandemic has also humanized leadership. Everyone gets the same place in the box. So essentially, all of these elements have changed the employee-employer relationship. So let's see the implications of those. Reinforcing values and mission-centric organizations have really been able to create that sense of community and purpose and provide that stability and something to look forward to while working in unstable times like we face today. Using technology as a tool to really rethink socialization, which might be missing in hybrid and remote work, is a key area where companies can improve on. We've seen some companies really use AI, VR, etc., to rethink their socialization efforts. Moreover, the halo effect of tapping into employer experience by investing in events, investing in diversity and inclusion, investing in their purpose has a lot of long-standing impacts, which can be seen in the next 2 years. And most importantly, something that's come through various conversations is the importance of middle managers being the proponents of culture. They are the ones who actually interact with employees and can give them the experience which the senior leaders are trying to accumulate towards the employees. So really focusing on how to develop that middle managers and training them is key.
And then finally, there's some discussions that are had regarding equity and how hybrid work has impacted that. Hybrid work has created greater autonomy and flexibility and allows individuals to better balance their work and personal lives. In addition, it removes long commutes and costs, which can be especially burdensome for women and people with disabilities. So what we've seen is this has actually made it easier for underrepresented groups in the workplace and in leadership to succeed.
And to wrap things up, here are a couple of our final takeaways. We had an incredible opportunity to meet with a vast array of HR leaders across many different organizations and many different industries. And these 4 kind of takeaways we wanted to leave. First, hybrid work may become the dominant work modality of the employee work experience for office jobs in general. And we think that as emerging research and new talent strategies develop, it's not going to impact productivity, it's not going to impact business results, and it will give flexibility to the new generations that are entering the workplace. While talent acquisition, retention, and engagement remain key pain points for organizations across multiple industries, firms are leveraging work modality and emerging research to attract and retain key talent while continuing to win in the marketplace. In addition, adaptability is a critical leadership capability that organizations must develop and will support leaders and employees through uncertainty. And finally, agile leadership, resiliency, and a dynamic employee value proposition strategy are crucial for organizational success. With that being said, we would like to open the floor to questions.
Great. Thanks so much, Holly, Dan, Rashi. Great presentation, great work. Lots of excellent insights in there. Had a couple questions come in already to our audience. I would certainly encourage you to submit any questions that you have, and we'll tackle those in the time we've set aside here for Q&A. So, one question, kind of links back to the first presentation by Kevin, where he kind of talked about, hybrid work, maybe not being convinced that it's here to stay or it's going to be the kind of dominant work model going forward. So based on your research, how do you think about hybrid work in the sense of competitive advantage, and also what it means for companies that maybe choose not to embrace it, either in the short term or the long term, whichever you'd like to comment on?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we found was that regardless of work modality, regardless of physical location, the most important element when it came to being intentional around telling employees where they should work or allowing them to choose where they work was aligning that intention with what you're trying to get out of those employees. And so when it comes to knowledge workers, where measuring productivity isn't as easy as counting the number of widgets that get created over a period of time, in those scenarios, oftentimes knowledge workers are being tracked against objectives or hitting targets for completing projects and that sort of thing. And if they're able to hit those targets and accomplish their objectives, regardless of where they are, that should factor into whatever policy you're choosing. If you want to have people in the office and you've aligned that with your core strategy, your talent strategy, and everything associated with that, it can make sense. However, it may cause younger generations to think twice or think differently about a particular opportunity. We just thought that it was most important that when you're designing that work modality, you're just being intentional and you're getting exactly what you want out of it.
In addition, we saw that for the companies that participated specifically in this study, there was no intention, a great intention to change what their current modality setup is, which, as you could see, a considerable number of those organizations that were in consulting or other potentially industries that don't have a large component of in-person working workers, they had no intention of greatly changing anything in the next 6 months to a year. And they talked about how they had made some considerable changes to support these changes in work modality for the future. So across the board, for the companies that we spoke to, it looked like they were communicating, we believe that hybrid is here to stay. We're just trying to understand what employee groups are going to be experiencing that hybrid and what is hybrid to us.
Great, makes a lot of sense. So another question that came in is, in your research, did you notice any trends relating to the number of days in the office versus at home for the companies that are using these models? It seems like maybe the 3-2 model seems to be kind of emerging as the most prevalent, but I'm curious what you saw in terms of dominant models, but also the variability across these models within organizations.
One key element there that we saw was, it wasn't company to company, but it was team to team and geography to geography. So some of the companies that we spoke with had a different answer for that based on the specific office. As an example, one of the companies said that they had anchor days where they would come in 2 days a week, and the team would agree on what those days were. And while that worked very well in their European offices, it did terribly in their US offices. And so when they were approaching the number of days in or out, it was around what the workers in that specific geographic region would be most inclined to follow, and then allowing the teams and the managers and the folks that are actually on the ground to figure that out, to figure out what would be most impactful for them.
Great. So yeah, that idea of really tailoring it to your work group and what makes sense for the nature of the work, the nature of the people in your group makes a lot of sense as opposed to a one-size-fits-all model. Another question that came in is around, we've seen a lot of talk or studies around, how hybrid work can increase or at least maintain productivity. In your work, did you come across any research or in your discussions with any companies find cases where they talked about maybe decreases in productivity that they saw as a result of moving to remote or hybrid work? Any kind of contrarian examples of where maybe things went off the rails?
I think one of the spaces that we saw productivity going down was less at the sort of subject matter expert level or middle management level, and more at the highest level of management. And one of the reasons we saw that was because of collaboration overload. So senior leaders who, previously were going into the office and you could, set up time on their calendars and get with them. They weren't experiencing the kind of volume and pressure of being required in conversations that they're facing now. And we actually saw that in some of the research that essentially it's not that their productivity is down, it's that they're being overwhelmed and not taking enough time to, allow themselves some breathing room to recharge. And so they're burning out over a period of time when they're just trying to help and support everyone else. So that's one place.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I just wanted to reinforce, Brad, that in most of our conversations, the everyone always spoke about how if you actually look at the data, productivity was improving. There were very few cases where the productivity was going down, but there's a lot of bias, like as Dan mentioned about the whole productivity paranoia, that if people are working from home, the productivity is less. But actually, we found so many use cases where they saw the business and the revenue actually increasing so much more. So that's something to keep in mind.
Yeah, great. I mean, I think both of those perspectives are important. I think the point you make, Dan, about overload, among senior managers, I think we've seen that across a large segment of the workforce as well. I think a lot of the research that came out has shown that a lot of these employees replace their commute time with just working longer hours, working more. And maybe that explains some of the productivity gains that we've achieved. But I think the big question is, how sustainable are those things long term, right? I mean, we've seen higher levels of burnout, increased issues around well-being. And so I think it raises questions about how do we balance those productivity and wellness issues going forward. Another question is around kind of equity, and you kind of close your presentation with this issue, and there's been a lot of debate around the remote and hybrid, and does it level the playing field, or is it actually going to exacerbate, biases and inequities that exist within organizations? Any thoughts you could share on that topic?
Yeah, I think in our slide, we discussed how for specifically women and individuals with different disabilities, it makes it so that they're able to juggle the different needs that they have in their life, whether, women are usually doing a lot of additional home work, as we've seen in different research. And so hybrid work allows them to be able to deal with the other components of their life while they're also still working, and kind of juggle that, in addition to, people who have disabilities and may struggle to get into the office. And that is just an additional level of barrier to them. I think it's interesting because we've had a previous presentation where this conversation was brought up about, okay, this is increasing equity, but where is it going to now somehow lead to maybe additional barriers to people developing in their career? If you're hybrid or remote, that makes it so you might not be able to be promoted at the same rate as someone who's in the office. I think that the conversation should be translated into, now that we have these technologies, now that we're able to kind of put a magnifying glass on how technology and new work modalities are supporting these groups, what does that mean in regards to updating our definitions of what productivity and a great leader and a great employee means, and continuing to work to understand how we can support these groups and maybe change the way we think about supporting these groups to better engage with them and push them forward in their careers.
Great. I think, the next question builds on that a bit, in terms of the question states, in the past, we saw employers largely mandating work hours and mobility policy. Recently, that's really shifted to where now we're giving employees a lot more kind of autonomy and control and influence than in the past. What, in your opinion, does this suggest about the availability of labor and labor market trends? And I guess, I could add on to that saying, in your conversation with employers, I think there's a lot of debate. Well, will all this disappear if we go into recession and the labor market contracts, and now employees need to keep those jobs and maybe don't have as many options as they did in the past? What are your thoughts on some of these trends we're seeing in their lifespan?
Yeah, we've definitely heard a lot about the balance of power, like with the pandemic, because of the opportunity and the importance of employee voice, especially in the newer generations. There's been a lot of focus on maximizing that employee experience, and leaders have been finding ways in which they can do that. But with the recession and economy, we've heard companies say that the balance scale is now, like, it's more balanced now with the power scale, because with the recession, employees do want more stability, and they're understanding that if some business really requires that in-person element and they've seen those results with the data, then they require them to come in person or really adjust to that level. And employees do want more stability because we are so much about the layoffs right now as well. So definitely it is sort of more balanced right now, but we're interested to see what happens in the end.
Yeah, and one of the things we heard about was sort of on the manufacturing side, where factories were reporting challenges in attracting hourly workers, or they were losing workers to firms that were providing compensation policies that they just couldn't match. And so what we've seen is sort of a shift, a paradigm shift towards away from extrinsic motivation to try to retain these folks, and moving more in towards intrinsic motivation, specifically giving choice and autonomy to those workers to help them feel like they're more a part of the workplace. And on the manufacturing side, we actually saw that flex work options are becoming interesting and may very well become a normal in the near future. And it doesn't look exactly like it does for knowledge workers, but things like flexible working hours, compressed work shifts, or work weeks, split shifts, shift swapping, essentially allowing folks to have a little bit more control over what they're going to do, how they're going to work, how long they're going to work, and allowing them some inputs there. We've seen that's driving engagement and helping to mitigate the fact that maybe they can't provide the same salary, but they can give them choice.
Great. So maybe one more question. This one might be a bit more of your predictions, but the question is, given the response to remote and hybrid work, how do you predict companies might embrace the possibility of work within the metaverse? I'm sure Meta, given the recent fall of their stock, would love it if everybody embraced working in the metaverse. And you did talk a bit about companies adopting VR and other things for onboarding employees today. So do you see this maybe one day expanding to where we're all going to be working in this metaverse?
Just based on what we've heard from different companies, I think that I don't know about the metaverse, but obviously in the past 2 years, we've had incredible technology come into the environment and be utilized consistently across different industries that maybe were a little bit more adverse to change and wouldn't always just so immediately accept these new platforms and technologies to support their workforce. So I'm not entirely sure about the metaverse. And I think that a component to work is also the connections that we can make in our everyday lives, in our careers. But that being said, this connects to the conversation about, are these changes here to stay, or are we going to return back to a different normal? I think the impact of technology alone has been such a great catalyst for future change that it is hard to say what the future will look like. But as our first presentation said, the only thing we can know for certain is that this technology is going to continue to push work forward and continue to change things up.
Yeah, I think to add on to that, we were talking about that a little bit when we were thinking about this and doing some additional research, and it's an interesting question. And I think one thing that we've sort of found through our study and independent research is that while the metaverse seems interesting and seems like it could be an answer to a problem, I think that it might be the answer to the wrong problem. Which is to say, is the problem that looking at a screen and talking with you guys over Zoom is reducing my ability to accomplish my goals or to collaborate, or is it something else? And I think that while metaverse might be something, or some similar VR technology might allow us to collaborate in some way better at some point, I think it sort of rushed too quickly to a solution when the problem may have been collaboration, overload, productivity, paranoia, that sort of thing. And so that's what a lot of our research was saying. And yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, again, it goes back to the idea of really matching the technology and the tools to the work and the collaboration and the interpersonal relationships that you need to really get the work done and to be successful. So Dan, Holly, Rashi, thank you so much for sharing your research with us today. Just for everybody listening, they'll be preparing a report, which will likely be distributing in January at some point. So please keep an eye out for that. And we welcome you to share it with all of your colleagues who may be interested as well. So thank you again.